This is Kol Yisrael, the Voice of Israel, broadcasting from Jerusalem. Face-to-face today, we talk to Dr. Haim Katz, one of Israel's top attorneys specializing in wills and testaments.
I came to Israel many years ago. I came in 1982 from England. We specialize in many fields in the office. We're a multifaceted and multidisciplinary office, but one of the things we specialize in particularly is probate and inheritance, and family law, and real estate. Those are the main items that we deal with.
And I understand there has been some change in the legislation regarding these items.
Yeah, there's constant change. There's constant change in every piece of legislation in any country. You get things change and life changes. I must tell you that the reality is that in the inheritance and probate law field, particularly, there hasn't been much change, and in fact, we are waiting for the reform of the Israel inheritance law, and it's not coming, and it's not happening. I mean, there's been discussion now for 13 years that the law, which is nearly 60 years old, is very out of date and doesn't reflect the reality of modern life and modern technology.
Just so our listeners understand the issue involved, tell us what you think needs to be changed.
Well, one of the things there are many advances in technology. For example, one of the clauses in the Israel inheritance law, one of the first few clauses are that a person can inherit on condition that he is born within 300 days of the death of the testator, of the person who's leaving him the estate. That's fine, except that today a person, because of modern technological means, can be born years after the testator has died. And we know of people who've gone, for example, soldiers in the Israeli army who've gone to war and who've left, frozen sperm in sperm banks, and as a result, conception took place long after the death of the father. The law as it stands today doesn't allow such a child, even though he's a natural child, and even though, in reality, why shouldn't he inherit his father? It doesn't allow a child like that to inherit. So that's just one aspect. I mean, there are other aspects, for example, just in the way of making a will. For example, why shouldn't you be able to make a will with a video? At the moment, you can't. So there are many other things that, for example, if you look at the technology that accompanied the making of wills, I mean, we all know that a pen and paper has been the technology of choice for thousands of years, or for at least 1,000 years. And typing a will with witnesses has been the technological choice for the last 150 years. Surely it's about time that we upgraded ourselves and allowed ourselves to do all kinds of things digitally, and to allow things to be done. As I say, video is also, it's about a 30-year-old technology, but still, it's not allowed. You're not allowed to sit opposite a video camera and say, this is my last will and testament. I mean, you can do it, but the will isn't valid. So basically, there are many aspects that need a reform, and that's not happening, very, very sadly, in fact.
What would your best advice be to a listener who has written a will and wants to rewrite it, or someone who hasn't written a will at all? What would you advise them?
Well, in Israel, we have several ways of making wills. One is a holographic will, which is basically, that's accepted the world over. And essentially, you sit down in the middle of the night because you feel that that's what you want to do. And you take out a sheet of paper and you put on it your last wishes, and you sign it and you date it. And as long as it's written in your hand, then that is a valid will. Now, holographic wills, that's what they're called, are recognized the world over. I mean, some very interesting cases. For example, a person who was involved in a terrible accident with a farmer who fell off with his tractor off terraces of farming, and he fell with his tractor, and as he was lying there pinned under, he took out a magic marker, a large marker, and wrote on one of these massive wheels, "Leave all to my son," dated it and signed it. And that wheel, that's a good pun on words actually, that wheel became the will, because that wheel was brought into the court and it was in fact recognized as a will. And there are many other cases of this sort. So that's a holographic will. The trouble with holographic wills is that people tend to write these wills when they don't feel well. You know, somebody gets up in the middle of the night, you know, in his early 50s, he's got a pressure in his chest, and he thinks, gosh, I better write a will. He sits down, he actually does write a will. But then he survives for another 40 years, and he's forgotten that he's got written that will, which he's now put among his papers in some bottom drawer. And in fact, 40 years later, that thing can surface or may not surface. So a much more sensible thing to do is to go to a lawyer and to have a will written with proper witnesses. Another reason to have proper witnesses is if there's a dispute, then there's a whole argument about whether the person was compos mentis, whether he understood what he was writing or wasn't, didn't understand what he was writing. At least when you have two witnesses, they testify to the fact that you seemed to them in full understanding as to what you were doing. So really the best way is to go to a lawyer and have him and his secretary or somebody else attest that you are perfectly in good shape and it's of your own free will that you're making this will. But those are two ways. I must just add one other thing, which is curious only to Israel. The only place in the world that a person can, on his deathbed, or when he feels that he's about to die, can actually say a will by heart. He can turn around and say, I'd like to make a last will, and say, I leave everything to, and fill in whatever he'll fill in whatever he wants to say. And that's called Tzavat Shchiv Merab. And so the person has to see, he has to feel that he's going to die. If he doesn't feel that, then, I mean, if a perfectly healthy person turned around to two of his friends and said, hey, I want to make a verbal will, that won't work. But if a person feels that he's on his deathbed, he's allowed to make a verbal will, which is completely valid in Israel.
Dr. Haim Katz. That's the news. This is Steve Lindy wishing you good afternoon and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.